Hispanic Patriot, a weekly podcast broadcast live from a secret and undisclosed location deep behind enemy lines in Denver, Colorado. Call me Colorado, we like to say around here. Here we speak the truth and nothing but the truth, so help us God. And now, without further ado, we are the hosts of the Hispanic Patriot, Nicholas Rosso and Hugo Chavez Ray. Give it up for Nick and Hugo.
Boomer and millennial. There we go. All right.
We got your borderline Gen Xer right here.
Welcome to the Hispanic Patriot podcast. Later in the show, we have a pre-recorded interview with Richard Holtorf, a candidate in the CD4 primary to be decided on June 25th. But first, we have coverage of the Trump trial verdict issued last Thursday by a jury in New York City. I'm sure everybody is up to snuff on it and what took place. We're just going to give a little bit of background to help people understand, those that are not exactly tuned completely into the situation. So it took them less than 12 hours to come back with a guilty verdict on all 34 counts. That's just astounding to me. This is the first time in our nation's history that a former president has been tried and convicted of anything. It's a sad date in America. It is, first of all, it is a disgrace how these charges were brought forth by the Soros-bought DA, Alvin Bragg. He literally made it up as he went along, starting with the convening of a grand jury where he proceeded to hide exculpatory evidence from the jury, which happens to be illegal, but, who's counting, right? It is often said that a grand jury can indict a ham sandwich, meaning that it's not hard to lead a grand jury to issue an indictment. And from the looks of it, Mr. Bragg is no stranger to ham sandwiches. But I digress. Alvin Bragg campaigned on the promise that he would get Trump one way or another. So this sham was preordained from the very beginning. He was also somehow able to get a Trump-hating judge appointed to the case. In fact, this same judge, Juan Merchan, had previously presided over two other Trump cases. Interesting. So this is in a system where judges are supposedly assigned randomly. Coincidence? And that's what the DA would have us believe. I'm not buying it. Are you?
No, not really, to be honest. I mean, when you have a judge that basically orders, and we discussed that before, is that they basically had the judge order the jury to come back with a guilty verdict. Those jury instructions were basically preset to make that happen. And on top of it, this goes back to history. The fall of the Roman Republic started with the end of Roman traditions. This is one of our traditions, is you don't obviously go after your political opponents through the judicial system because it denigrates both the executive and the judicial branch. So, this is historic. It really is a historic moment because this is how republics fall, is the complete lack of care for their traditions because they forgot what those traditions uphold, which is the very foundation of our democracy. These people want to pretend that they're defending democracy. They couldn't be moving further from it. This is what Xi Jinping in China does to his political opponents. This is what Vladimir Putin does to his political opponents. This is what the Ayatollah Khomeini does to his political opponents. They put them through trials. We long away from the days where, off with their heads. That's just not what we have today. Today we have Soviet-style kangaroo courts that are a complete disgrace to our country, the United States. We should be different than all those other countries, and we just proved that we're moving towards them.
Yep. So let's analyze what took place. Law professor Jonathan Turley, who is a Fox News contributor and has been speaking quite a bit on this topic, He is from George Washington University, and he stated, "I have long been critical of the case as a clear example of the weaponization of the criminal justice system. No one seriously believes that Alvin Bragg would have spent this time and money to prosecute what is ordinarily a state misdemeanor if the defendant was anyone other than Trump." Here's what Professor Turley wrote. The famous Roman philosopher and orator Marcus Tullius Cicero once said, "The more laws, the less justice." This past week, New York judges and lawyers appeared eager to prove that the same is true for cases against Donald Trump. After an absurd $450 million decision courtesy of Attorney General Letitia James, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg brought his equally controversial criminal prosecution over hush money paid to former porn star Stormy Daniels before the 2016 election. Lawyers everywhere have been scouring the civil and criminal codes for any basis to sue or prosecute Trump before the upcoming 2024 election. None has been forthcoming. This past week highlights the damage done to New York's legal system because of this unhinged crusade. They've charged him with everything short of ripping a label off a mattress. Just a few weeks ago, another judge imposed a roughly $500 million penalty in a case without a single victim who lost a single cent on loans with Trump. Indeed, bank officials testified they wanted more business with the Trump organization. Where's the victim? Now Bragg brought a case that has taken years to develop and millions of dollars in litigation costs for all parties. That is all over a crime from before the 2016 election that is a misdemeanor under state law that had already expired under the statute of limitations. Like his predecessor, Bragg previously scoffed at the case. However, two prosecutors, Kerry Dunn and Mark Pomerantz, then resigned and started a public pressure campaign to get New Yorkers to demand prosecution. Pomerantz shocked many of us by publishing a book on the case against Trump, who was still under investigation and not charged, let alone convicted of any crime. He did so despite objections from his former colleague that such a book was grossly improper. Nevertheless, it worked. Bragg brought a Rube Goldberg case that is so convoluted and counterintuitive that even liberal legal and analysts criticized it. Now, Trump paid Daniels to avoid any publicity over their brief alleged affair. As a celebrity, there was ample reason to want to keep the affair quiet, and that does not even include the fact that he is a married man. It also occurred before the 2016 election, and there was clearly a benefit to quash the scandal as a candidate. That political motivation is at the heart of this long-delayed case. It is a repeat of the case involving former Democratic presidential candidate John Edwards. This goes way back. I remember this case. In 2012, the Justice Department used the same theory to charge the former Democratic presidential candidate after a disclosure that he not only had an affair with filmmaker Rielle Hunter, but also hid the fact that he had a child by her. Edwards denied the affair, and money from donors was passed to Hunter to keep the matter quiet. The Justice Department spent a huge amount on the case to show that the third-party payments were a circumvention of campaign finance laws. However, Edwards was ultimately found not guilty on one count, while the jury deadlocked on the other 5. But unlike Trump, his trial was in North Carolina. With Trump, the Justice Department declined a repeat of the Edwards debacle and did not bring any federal charge. But Bragg then used the alleged federal crime to bootstrap a defunct misdemeanor charge into a felony in the current case. He argued that Trump intentionally lied when his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, listed the payments as retainer costs rather than a payment to avoid reporting it as a campaign contribution to himself. Thus, if he had simply had Cohen report the payment as hush money, there would be no crime. Once again, the contrast to other controversies is telling. Before the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton's campaign denied that it had funded the infamous Steele dossier behind the debunked Russian collusion claims. The funding was hidden as legal expenses by then Clinton campaign general counsel Mark Elias. The FEC later sanctioned the campaign over its hiding of the money. Notice how they sanctioned, they didn't prosecute. When a reporter tried to report the story, he said Elias pushed back vigorously, saying, "You, or your sources, are wrong." Times reporter Maggie Haberman said, "Folks involved in funding this lied about it and was sanctimony for a year." Likewise, John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chairman, was called before congressional investigators and denied categorically any contractual agreement with Fusion GPS. Sitting behind him was Elias, who reportedly said nothing to correct the misleading information given to Congress. Folks, that's called lying to Congress. Yet there were no charges stemming from the hiding of the funding, though it was all part of the campaign budget. Making this a sordid business even more repellent was the appearance of Cohen himself on the stand. Cohen recently was denounced by a judge as a serial perjurer who is continuing to game the system. Cohen has a long record as a legal thug who has repeatedly lied when it served his interests. He has a knack for selling his curious skill to powerful figures like Trump and now Bragg. For those of us who have been critics of Cohen from when he was still working for Trump, it is mystifying that anyone would call him to the stand to attest to anything short of the time of day. And even then, most of us would check our watches. Fortunately, witnesses are no longer required to put their hand on the Bible in swearing to testify truthfully in court. Otherwise, the court would need the New York Fire Department standing by in case the book burst into flames. So this is the case. A serial perjurer used to convert a dead state misdemeanor into a felony based on an alleged federal election crime that was rejected by the Justice Department. That's it in a nutshell, folks. Nothing else to see. But did we all see that? No. They could well succeed in a city where 9 out of 10 potential jurors despise Mr. Trump. So trying Trump in Manhattan is about as difficult as the New York Yankees going to bat using beach balls rather than baseballs. It would be hard to miss. However, this is a Pyrrhic victory for the New York legal system. Whatever the outcome, it may be proven a greater indictment of the New York court system than the defendant. Jonathan Turley is an attorney and professor at George Washington University Law School. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. I mean, there was no case. They made it all up. They converted misdemeanors into felonies, got a complicit judge and a complicit jury, and in less than 12 hours, they came back with guilty verdicts on 34 counts. You think they really discussed a whole lot? No, I don't think so. I think they were premeditated. These people should be railroaded into a courtroom themselves, tried and convicted for fraud, because that's exactly what they are, a big fraud. Now, on the good side of the news, of course, we all know that President Trump, once again, benefits from the attacks. Poll numbers are up, donations are through the roof, and in my humble opinion, I think the Democrats just basically handed a landslide to Donald Trump in November. Despite what may come of the appeals, I'm of the opinion that all of this is going to get tossed on appeal. But unfortunately, it's not going to be in. It's not going to be before the election. So this is all going to hang. The Democrats are going to have fun calling Donald Trump a convicted felon, and every time they utter those words, the cash register rings at the Trump Foundation, Trump campaign. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching.
Well, and that's the main point, right? Is to say, well, your guy is a convicted felon. It's like, oh, well, your guy's an unconvicted felon. Like,
Yeah.
you know, what's worse? You know,
No, their guy is an unconvicted traitor who committed treason. That's far worse than a hush money payment to a porn star. Trust me on that one.
Yeah, man.
Yep, that's what I had a nice conversation with a Trump hater on social media here the last couple of days, and now this lady, I don't know. You ever heard of Lynn Bartles?
Oh yeah.
You know her? You heard of
Yeah.
her? Right? Yeah, she's been she's a retired journalist now, but she's been posting all these anti-Trump memes and narratives, and I've been firing back with all barrels. So it's just
well, and that's the fight they want. That's really the fight the Democrats want, is because as long as we have to spend time talking about, you know, the virtues of this case or that or whatever have you, we're not talking about the issues. You know, we're not talking about you know, the destruction of our next generation through abortion and enforced Democrat Party policy that creates poverty. We're not talking about the border. We're not talking about foreign policy that Biden is just completely asleep at the wheel at. You know, we're talking about porn stars and hush money and lying lawyers, and you know, this belongs in a sitcom, not in the public sphere.
Yep, and to be clear, I'm only engaging temporarily because we're going to move on to issues, because I think that's what we need to do as Republicans. We need to get the word out to people that will listen to truth, and hopefully create that landslide that I believe is coming.
Absolutely. Well, now Trump is a very common experience to many common Americans.
So the president seems to be in good spirits. I got to tell you, man, I am truly amazed at this man. I don't know that of anyone. I couldn't do what he's doing. I couldn't put up with what he's been having to put up with and still come out smiling. I don't know. It's just amazing.
I think it's his love for the people, honestly. I think he genuinely loves the American people, and I think they give him the strength to keep going, honestly. Like, that he's a populist candidate. He gets his power from the people in all ways.
Well, I take it one step further. I think God has his hand on him. I really do. You know.
Well, like in Proverbs says, you can't do anything alone. You never rest on your own power.
He's not a perfect man, but then who is, right? Yeah. The only one that was perfect, they crucified. And now they're trying to crucify Trump. So, all right, let's breaking news today, of course, is the Mr. Biden executive order on the border. He basically issued it, and what's really hilarious about all this is he creates the problem, and then 3.5 years later decides he's going to come out and show how tough he is and issue executive orders to fix the problem that he created. Amazing. Let's watch this short video. It's hilarious. Mayorkas trying to explain the executive order to the people. Roll it, Peter.
Seem to have trouble explaining Biden's executive action on the border. Watch this.
If we experience 7 consecutive calendar days where the average number of encounters each day is below 1,500, then 14 days after that 7th day, we will reopen. And if in fact the number of encounters thereafter is 2,500 or more on average for 7 consecutive days, we have the authority to again implement this bar.
Okay, you got that? Are we the wiser now? The president of the National Sheriff's Association, Sheriff Greg Champagne, joins me now. Do you understand the details of this executive action? It's very complicated. We can't work it out. Can you?
Well, first off, Stuart, good morning, and thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to come in here and speak on behalf of the over 3,000 sheriffs of the country. You're absolutely right. It is very difficult to understand the convoluted nature of this executive order. We would like to say that the Sheriffs of America, the NSA, has been pleading with President Biden since he took office to have a personal meeting with us so he could hear from sheriffs the direct impact, the negative impact that this unrestricted immigration has had on the country. We have not had that meeting, and so we've been urging him also to take some type of executive action on this. Virtually every president of the last 3 or 4 presidents have numerous times taken executive action restricting immigration. So finally, why now, after 3.5 years and over 2 million gotaways, which are those who surreptitiously sneak into the country, sometimes in camouflage. We don't know who they are. They're not registered. So they're all about the country at this particular time. We are having difficulty making heads or tails of the executive order. It's very convoluted, and we believe that's by design. The question is going to be enforcement. Is it even enforceable? Are they going to make a serious attempt to enforce it? So it's kind of a wait-and-see approach, but we're not very optimistic that there's going to be any real change at this point.
It was supposed to go into effect at midnight last night, supposed to at least. I don't suppose you've seen any change yet, have you?
Well, not yet. And I daily speak and text with sheriffs along the Texas and Arizona border about the issues. I mean, I don't think we're going to see a change today. Time will tell. But again, we're not optimistic. The discussions we've had with some of the president's top advisors, who at least will get a meeting once a year or so with them, basically, they have no inclination to really halt the wave of immigration. In fact, it was explained to us that we should be thankful that we are living in a time to witness the greatest migration in world history, which was kind of astounding. But they're not really interested, from what we understand, about really restricting immigration. And it's not that we're against immigration. We're just against the side effects, the danger it presents to the country, especially by these gotaways who could be criminals, convicted individuals from other countries. And we don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they're planning. So it's a wait and see. We're certainly hopeful because the sheriffs, especially along the border, are at their wits' end. But we're not optimistic that there are going to be any significant changes here.
All right, we'll leave it right there. Sheriff Greg Champagne, thanks very much for being with us, sir. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Unbelievable. Did you understand what Mayorkas said?
To be honest, I kind of did. In the sense of, so basically, whenever
give us your in depth.
I will. Well, it's actually fairly simple for how stupid it sounds, which is always the worst thing to do in government. So basically, at 1,500 daily encounters at whether it's the whole border or border checkpoints, whatever have you, they're going to put some sort of injunction into the asylum-seeking process to say, okay, no more for today. I apologize. It actually has to get, so at 1,500, they start looking at maybe shutting it down. At 2,500 rather, they will most likely have the possibility to shut it down if they feel like it. And that's only a week after it's already taken place. So it's basically a lot of words to say we're not doing really anything, but we could do something now. we might do something now if it gets bad enough, because it's a daily cap. 1,500, 2,500. Okay, that doesn't sound too much. 365 days a year. That's 1 million to 500,000. That's of how much has to actually go through before they say, okay, now is enough crime. Now, 500,000 to 1 million people. Now that's enough. No, we're putting a stop to it. It's
Now
not
we'll
serious.
We'll close the door.
Right. It's not
That's-
serious. It's a
That's
lot
like
of
closing
words.
the barn door after the cows have gotten out.
That
And
is
all-
literally what the executive order might as well say, because
all
that's
the
exactly what it
horses.
is. Well, and they're
Uh,
running across the country. We're tired of it because we're tired of cleaning up their droppings, I guess.
Unbelievable. And of course Biden's doing his photo op over at in Normandy for
Yeah.
D-Day.
Which is a beautiful, beautiful thing, if he actually honored the sacrifices of the,
Yeah, he
tried to,
doesn't care. It's all about a photo op for him.
or remembering his own son, who didn't die in Iraq despite his memory.
Yeah, no. I don't talk about the dead, but his son did not die in action. So
No,
let's-
that's why
let's-
a man lies about his own dead son. I'm sorry. As
Yep.
a person who's lost family members myself, that's something I can't really tolerate very well.
Yep. All right. Well, yesterday I had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Richard Holtorf, who is quite a firecracker himself, and a Latino from Spain, which a lot of people don't know because they can't see the name Holtorf as Latino, but his actual name is Alonso. It's Richard Alonso Holtorf. And he and I sat down for an interview to talk about the CD4 race. And we've got it on tape now for you. So we're going to play that, and then we'll come back after we're done with that. And welcome to the Hispanic Patriot podcast. We are here today with Richard Holtorf. Richard Holtorf is a retired U.S. Army colonel with 29 years of service, a third-generation rancher, farmer, feedlot manager, and current member of the Colorado House of Representatives. A graduate of Colorado State University, Richard used his Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering to aid his military service as an AH-64 Apache test pilot, maintenance officer, and commander of aviation units for the U.S. Army. While serving in the military, Richard also completed his Master of Business Administration degree at Boston University, then went on to receive an additional master's degree in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. Richard and his wife of 31 years, Mary, live near Akron, Colorado on their family ranch. Welcome aboard, Richard. Richard is a candidate for Congressional District 4, one of, I believe, 6 candidates currently on the ballot for the primary election on June the 25th. So, Richard, introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a little bit about why you're running and what sets you apart from your other fellow candidates.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Hugo. My name is Richard Alonso Holtorf. I am a retired military officer, senior officer. I had a very long and illustrious military career. I'm very proud of my military service. When I was young and 18, my dad said, "You want to go to college, you better figure out a way to pay for it here on the ranch and farm." So I went to the Army recruiting station and learned how to spell ROTC. And since then, I had spent 4 years as a cadet at Colorado State University, and then 29 years as a military officer, and in many capacities as a reserve officer. Also, I've worked for Buffalo Springs Ranch and truly the United States Army. Those are the only 2 entities I've worked for in my life. But I've been all over the world, 5 overseas tours, 2 combat tours, commanded troops all the way to the battalion command level, deployed with 10th Mountain Division to Afghanistan the first time, and then deployed with 2nd Infantry Division the second time. I love rural Colorado. I love my country. I love selfless service. And I really feel I am the most qualified candidate if you look at my resume and my geopolitical experience and the amount of degrees that I hold. I have 3 degrees, one from Colorado State in mechanical engineering, another from Boston University in business administration, and a 3rd master's degree from the United States Army War College in strategic studies. Now, you asked me, why do I want to be a candidate? Well, I will tell you, last summer, I had enough of Ken Buck. He was our CD4 congressman, and he continued to support the Biden money machine. He continued to support Christopher Wray, the director of FBI. He continued to support the director of Homeland Security's, Director Mayorkas, continued to make very bad votes and not represent Colorado or the district, or Republicans for that matter. I don't know if he was compromised or he'd sold out or what he'd done, but his voting was very atypical and did not represent Eastern Colorado. So I told him I was going to help him pack his suitcase, started an exploratory committee, and then announced. And I was the first legitimate public servant to take on Ken Buck before anybody else. While everyone else was on the sidelines watching, in the bleachers watching, I told Ken Buck I was going to help him pack his suitcase. And that's when I started my campaign back in October. Now, subsequently, he made an announcement to not run. And then this spring, he made for Colorado and CD4. And all that aside, the reason I'm running is because of that. And also, I've got grandkids. I've got 5 daughters, and I've got 2 grandchildren. And I grew up in a great country with great opportunities. And I don't see that. Our future is very bleak. The republic is in distress, and we have to save our republic. So that's why I'm doing it, Hugo.
Okay. Well, regarding Ken Buck, there is a lot of speculation about why he decided to cut his term short, and you can have several guesses on that, but I think it's pretty clear that if he's not compromised, that he had made it his mission to sabotage this district and then pretend that he had a more morally high ground reason to exit the party and his position. But most voters see through all of that, and his days were numbered. So I guess he figured he'd just leave everybody high and dry and run off into the sunset to his cushy CNN or MSNBC job that he's got waiting. But enough about him. We don't need to talk about him. I want to talk about you. The biggest question that we're talking to candidates about, of course, now today is relating to the fiasco last week in the Kangaroo Court in New York City, when they with such conviction they convicted President Trump of 34 felony counts, all trumped up, all made up. They turned misdemeanors into felonies. And so we're asking candidates, first of all, are you a Trump supporter?
Yes.
Okay.
And I voted for Trump in 2016. I voted for him in 2020, and I'll vote for him again in 2024.
All right. So this trial didn't change your position at all with regards to President Trump.
Well, I would also say that it's a charade. Here we are. This happened in 2016. That was 8 years ago. If this was such an important issue, why didn't this get addressed 4 years ago when Trump left office?
Correct.
Which is what should have happened. So absolutely, this is a cabal. It's all timed. It's an attempt by the Democrats and the Democrat attorney generals and the Democrat Attorney General in New York to try to stick Trump with a felony charge to keep him off the ballot. It's very clear. And it's a bunch of hooey. So, no, I don't support that. I think it's a political hit job. It's called lawfare. And it's a problem. And I look completely past that. Of course, there's 3 other states that are trying to do the same thing. And it's wrong.
Yeah.
This is not Honduras. This is not Nicaragua. Un país así es lo que hacen estos países. Atacan los políticos que no le quieren para cancelarlos. So yeah, this is like some third world Central American country.
Absolutely.
Where the politicians are attacking their opponents in court to try to cancel them out. Like I just stated in Spanish. And yes, I speak Spanish. I'm the only candidate, by the way, Hugo, that's a member of the Colorado Hispanic Republicans in CD4 the race. I'm the only candidate that speaks Spanish fluently. I'm the only candidate that is Hispanic. I think voters need to know that. Y también yo hablo español. Bastante bien. So yeah, I think our community needs to know who I am and why they should want me to support them in Congress. It'd be the first time when Greg Lopez gets elected, I'm really supporting him. He'll be the first, and maybe I'll be the second.
Very good. So, a related question to that regarding President Trump's policies, do you support all of his policies? And if not, which ones do you differ with with the president?
Well, I don't support everything President Trump says. I'm not a Trump groupie.
I'm talking about policies only.
I know. But a lot of Trump groupies will not only revere Trump, but every policy that he states, they will say, oh, it's got to be great because Trump said it. It depends on the policy, Hugo. Now, I do have...
that's the question.
I'm going to give you a couple answers here. The first answer I'm going to give you is something that I really support, the Trump-era tax cuts. They need to be made permanent. I think that should be done through Congress, and I want to run that legislation when I get to the U.S. Congress, because that is helping the economy, and it improves gross domestic product. It improves the standard of living of every citizen because they get to keep more of their money. But let me give you another example. With respect to Ukraine, Trump doesn't want to support Ukraine. But I will tell you, we're fighting a proxy war against the Russians. And if the Russians take Ukraine, what's next? Poland? Moldova? Yes, those are the next borders. And will Russia continue its expansionism? I would say yes. Look at history. Look at what happened 80 plus years ago. Similar steps were made. Now, I think Biden and Secretary Blinken are the equivalent of Neville Chamberlain, who served Great Britain during World War II and the early part of World War II. This appeasement, this weak foreign policy that doesn't show strength. And I went to the Army War College, and the motto in the U.S. Army War College is peace through strength. You have to show and display and be ready to exude your strength, either diplomatic, informational, military, or economic. That's called the dime principle. Those are the 4 elements of power of any government ever in the history of the world. So yes, we have to look at that. And yes, we have to support Ukraine. We cannot let Russia win. So that's one area that I'm very have a different policy position on.
Regarding Ukraine, do you have any concerns with how the money that we have provided them has been managed?
Oh, absolutely. I think the Secretary of State and the President have done a horrible job. Every dollar that we send should be under a lend-lease arrangement. Every dollar should be, if it's a lent, it should be paid back with interest. If we send equipment, it is leased, and there should be lease provisions with every piece of equipment to include the cost of the equipment, the amortization of that equipment, the depreciation of that equipment, and agreements that they will return the equipment and pay for the refurbishment of that equipment post the Ukraine-Russia war. Now, as a senior military officer, I understand that, and I understand how to negotiate and do that. I've worked in coalition operations in Afghanistan. I've worked at some of the highest levels of government for 2-star and 3-star generals. This is all feasible and possible with the right foreign policy position and the right agreements. And Ukraine, if they win this war, hopefully when they win this war, in future time, they'll have a great capacity to repay. They're the breadbasket of Eastern Europe, and they have a great resource for natural resources. They have 4 ports, and they can grow grain as good as any other place in Europe. So that's my position on that.
Okay. So with regards to, you're currently serving in the Colorado State Legislature. So in what ways have your core values shaped your past legislative initiatives?
Well, I'm a fiscal conservative, and I also want to help people and solve problems. Most people don't know this, but in the last 5 years, I've passed over 40 bills, resolutions, and tributes signed by the governor or the speaker of the House or the president of the Senate, all Democrats, all with a majority or super majority in the Democrat Party, and I've gotten things done. I have 2 bill signings this week, Hugo. I have one tomorrow at 4 for Military Women's Veterans Appreciation Day. I was the prime sponsor of that, and I got that across the finish line. And also on Thursday, there's another bill, which is a Social Security tax relief bill. That also was my bill. And the governor's going to sign that because that bill, people ages 55 to 64, now will not have to pay state tax on their Social Security income, which is 4.4%. So I bring tax relief to seniors, particularly seniors that retire early or those that are disabled. That's the kind of legislative work this guy does. Now, there's other candidates. There's one candidate that's representing CD3 right now that tries to tout her legislative prowess. But if you watch the 9 News debate, Kyle Clark cornered her. She's only passed 1 bill in 4 years that's signed by the president. 1 bill. Everything else is a bunch of bunk. Pura mentira. Está hablando pura mentira, la verdad, para todo el mundo, para escucharme.
Do you,
Una sola.
regarding that though, do you believe it's even feasible to expect Biden to sign any legislation that the Republicans put forth?
Well, look at Polis. He's as liberal as they get, arguably more than Biden. But when you see good legislation, it's staring you in the face. You're going to sign it, unless you're a damn fool.
I'm not a Polish fan, but
Well, I'm not either.
I have a hard time believing that he's not as far left as Biden is. I think in some ways he's farther left.
I think you're right. But he's signing my bills. And why is that? Because they're good legislation and he can see the good in it.
And that's a good thing.
And it's bipartisan. I brought Democrats on board to help me promote and pass the legislation, because that's the unwritten rule. If you don't have a Democrat sponsor, it's not getting through the Colorado General Assembly. The supermajority has already stated that. We all know that. That's an unwritten rule. And so
your first
there's
step,
pieces of legislation that'll get passed without that caveat.
okay. So your first step, of course, in this race is the primary. And that's coming up here within 3 weeks. In fact, I just got my ballot today. Now I'm not in CD4, so I don't have a dog in this race like a lot of people do. I used to live in CD4, but now I live in CD1 of all places. But you've got some priorities in mind, I'm sure, for when and if you're elected. So
Yes.
What would you say would be your top 3 policy priorities for your first term in Congress?
Okay, let me grab my, I'm going to reach over here really quickly and grab my power cord because my battery low light just came on. So just stand by 1 second. I'll answer those questions. There we go. I better turn the power on or this thing's going to want to quit working. So as I multitask and pull out my power cord, there we go. Just like that. The first thing that I want to do, you know, Colorado's a sanctuary state, and I actually ran an immigration bill this session. I was the only one that ran the only immigration bill that was defeated, that said ICE and Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, and ISE Immigration and Customs Enforcement should be able to talk to state and local law enforcement. And I tried to repeal the state law in 2013 that blocks state and local law enforcement from communicating with the federal Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So this border policy, the border problem is a real issue. And we need to stop states that want to thumb their nose at the federal laws. So how do we do that, Hugo? Well, I've come up with a policy position, and I'm going to run legislation when I go to Congress that says if you're a state and you don't want to follow federal law, your block grant allocations that you get from the federal government every year will be reduced and eliminated based on the federal laws and the number of federal laws that you don't want to follow. And states, if you don't want to follow federal law, go for it, California. You don't have to, but you don't get any federal money. You can just fund your own budget. You don't get to draw down and pull down those federal dollars. I worked 5 years in the state legislature. I know how much states depend on that federal money to run their budgets, to lift up their budgets and plus up their budgets. And then all the extra at the state level, they just spend on all kinds of social programs and all kinds of programs that, arguably we don't need. And many of us, particularly if you're a Republican, you don't want. So that's the first thing I want to do. And it's completely doable. And I've noticed on the campaign trail now, other candidates, Flora and others, are stealing my platform, which doesn't surprise me because I've got good ideas. The next thing I want to do, when President Trump gets in office as the president, I want to support his border plan. And I've got a great 5-point plan. And other candidates are copying that too. Bobert and Flora both have copied my 5-point plan because first you're going to declare war on narco traffickers, los narcotraficantes. And then we're going to use and set up a joint task force that's going to have military resources patrolling and securing the border and helping Customs and Border Patrol with assets that we have. Drones, 24/7 drone surveillance. We can have that with the Air Force right out of Nellis. We can activate reserve component forces. I served in the National Guard and Reserve. I know more than any other candidate about how to implement National Guard forces to augment state and local law enforcement. You want to know why, Hugo? Because I was in the National Guard after 9/11, and I was activated under state active duty orders to support Operation Noble Eagle. I was the officer in charge of the operations center in the state of Colorado, and I oversaw 13 regional and international airports to provide military security, and I worked with the FAA to stand up the TSA. The TSA didn't exist, but I helped stand it up. So that's intergovernmental coordination between military and civilian. I've done it. No other candidate knows this or has done it, but I have. I've been on state active duty. I've been on federal active duty. Okay. I've been in all three components of the Army: National Guard, active duty, and reserve. So I'm more qualified than anybody, Hugo, to work on this border issue and use military resources in a responsible way, in a safe way, to help with the immigration problem. Now, I also want to talk about something else. I truly believe in term limits, and I've signed a term limits pledge. And my term limit policy, which I want to promote when I go to Washington, D.C., and the swamp's not going to like it. Careerists aren't going to like it. But I say, if you're in the U.S. Congress, you serve 3 terms. If you get in leadership, you can have 2 more terms. That's 5 total terms. That's it, 10 years. And if you're in the U.S. Senate, you get 2 terms. That's 12 years for the love of God. And if you get in leadership, you can have 1 more term. That's 18 years of service. That's a long time to be in Washington, D.C. And if we want to drain the swamp, we need term limits. So that's another thing I'm going to take to Washington, D.C. And so that's a big uphill climb, Hugo.
That is an uphill climb because they're the ones that have to vote for it. And most people don't believe that Congress has the guts to vote for something like that. I believe that the actual workable solution would be some sort of constitutional amendment that would pass through something like the Convention of States or a standard constitutional convention, which is very hard to do, and there's a lot of pitfalls in organizing one, but that's another topic altogether.
Well,
But,
Hugo,
okay,
I
so
want to mention something, Hugo. I did sign the Convention of States Pledge, and I think under a single subject convention, single subject being term limits, single subject, you could get 38 states under a single subject to convene and vote on that. Also, balanced budget amendment. I think you also, under a single subject convention, you could facilitate that as well. The problem is everyone's concerned that if you do a convention of states, it could get co-opted or compromised, and they could try to rewrite the whole Constitution. And I think that would be very dangerous, because I am a traditional constitutionalist.
Yeah, me too. That is the biggest concern. But like you said, if it was possible to limit it to certain topics, then and make sure it stayed that way, then that would be something doable. So I believe there's 20 some odd states now that have opted in, but you got to get up to what, 36?
Either 36 or 38. So there's a ways to go.
Yep. So would you support, this is something that's near and dear to me because I've been yelling this from the rooftops for a long time, and that is voter ID. So would you support a national photo voter ID for all U.S. citizens? And what would you say to those who oppose this action?
Well, I think you absolutely need voter identification, but it's also a state function in a state election. But for a federal election, that's legislation that could be promulgated that said you had to have federal ID and federal identification to vote in a federal election. So absolutely, that's a possibility.
So do you realize that we are the only major industrialized nation on the planet that does not have a voter ID policy?
Yeah, Mexico has a better photo ID policy than we have. En México está mejor. Todo el mundo tiene una identificación para votar. Diferente exclusivamente para votar. In Mexico, they got a better voter identification program than we have in this country. It's unfathomable. So yeah,
in my country, in my home country of Peru, Election Day is a national holiday, and mandatory voting is the law. So if you are a citizen of the nation and you do not vote, then you get fined. And that's a third world country doing that. And in Peru, we have something called it's in Spanish, it's a DNI, but it's a national identification card granted by the government that identifies every citizen of the country. Without that DNI card, you can't do squat. You can't buy property. You can't hold a job. You can't buy a car. You can't, literally, you can't do anything without that card. And that card also serves as a photo ID. So that's doubles as your voter ID. When you go to vote, you present that card, they check you off, you vote, and you're gone. There's no voting in multiple districts. There's no shenanigans. Everything is pretty straight up, and everything is done by paper ballot and hand counted. So
I don't think we want to be that extreme with federal identification as a state, as a union, United States, as a union of states. But I do believe that we need voter identification to prove.
I agree with that, with the overall thing, but I'm just pointing that out just to show how exact third world countries can be versus big bad USA.
Sure.
And I do believe that for federal elections, absolutely 100%, there should be a national photo voter ID card, because we cannot have non-citizens voting in our elections, especially our federal elections.
especially with the number of immigrants, the undocumented immigrants that have come to the country now. And we already know that many of them, because of the motor voter laws, are popping up on voter rolls.
Yeah.
It's a problem, huge problem. So I'd be more than happy to, draft legislation that says for federal elections, it's one U.S. citizen, one vote, one ballot, one vote, and there needs to be an identification behind it that proves your citizenship. Yep. In fact, I did run a bill in the state of Colorado for USA to be on your driver's license if you're a U.S. citizen. You can go back and look at the records. I ran that bill because of this very reason. So it would say USA if you're a U.S. citizen. And it was voluntary, and the process was to identify who's a U.S. citizen. So if you look at a driver's license like this, you're going to say USA. That means that you have proven that you're a U.S. citizen. You may be from some other country. You may be an immigrant. But if you're a U.S. citizen, it's going to say USA on your driver's license. But the Democrats didn't like that, and they voted it down in State Affairs Committee. Just like my immigration bill, supporting ICE.
They don't like anything that cleans up the voting process. They like it muddied up because it's them, and we all know that that's the case on that. But
yes, sir.
So, what are your thoughts regarding the Department of Education, and does it have a role in shaping local school policies?
I don't think it should have any role in shaping local policy, because local school boards should determine a local school policy and curriculum, working with each state.
Correct.
It's not a federal issue. Now, the Department of Education, we've got candidates in this race that say, I'm going to go to Washington, D.C., and I'm going to abolish the Department of Education. Well, that young lady from Douglas County is a damn fool, because she can't go anywhere and abolish anything. It's a nice little speech. Anybody that says that doesn't understand the role of one U.S. congressman in a field of 436 congressmen. Now I think we're down to 431 or 2, because so many have quit and resigned and walked away from their offices.
But to that point, though,
you can't do that. So the only
she can't unilaterally do it. She can't unilaterally do it, but the House has what's known as the power of the purse. So by exercising that power, you could literally defund the Department of Education and other useless bureaucracies that are within our government. Don't you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. In fact, when the FBI wants to attack parents that are going to school board meetings and try to call them domestic terrorists, I think we should put provisions in funding. And this is another piece of legislation that I would draft, that if you're not going to follow the Constitution and you're not going to do your job as stated in your mission statement, and you're going to violate the Constitution, your funding will be immediately cut by 25, 30%. And you hit them right where it hurts. So these departments won't violate the Constitution. Their charters, their missions, and their behavior will be embedded with and aligned with the U.S. Constitution, or their funding is going to suffer. But right now, the Department of Education, through its contract services for student loans, holds literally hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars, of student debt across this nation. And that's one of their main roles. And they still have to adjudicate and settle that debt. Although Biden is trying to buy votes by canceling it all away. And I had a really smart constituent tell me, you know what Biden's doing? It's not just taking the money and saying, hey, student, you don't have to pay it. It's reaching out to the parents too. Because I got 5 daughters. You know how many student loans I've co-signed in my life? Too many. Well, I had one daughter that paid her way. She's more like me. She's fiscally conservative and very good with money. So she paid her way. I'm really proud of her. And my first daughter went to Kansas, and so I didn't have that obligation. That was her mother's obligation, more than mine. And so I didn't have that situation. But I did have 1, 2, I think 3 that did have to, and 2 specifically that my wife and I had to co-sign on a lot of student loan debt. Now, fortunately for me, my daughters are very successful. They're all working young adults, and they have careers, and they're making good money. Some of them are doing better than I am, and I'm very proud of them in their careers. And so they're paying down their student loans, and they're going to take care of that because that's their obligation. That should not be written off, because you don't learn responsibility when you do that. You borrowed the money to get your education, now pay it back, because they did you a good turn. Now you give back because it's your turn to settle that indebtedness.
All right. Well, we're up against the clock, so what would you have for the voters out there in a closing statement? What would you like to leave them with?
Well, Hugo, first of all, thank you for the time on your program. I want everybody to know that I am just like you. I am a Hispanic patriot. Yo nací en España. Yo tengo toda mi vida aquí. Menos tiempo en México, Puerto Rico, and España. My father was an immigrant. I understand our community. I speak the language. I'm the only candidate in the primary that does that. If Latinos and Hispanics want somebody who can represent them, they're looking at the candidate right now, talking to you, sir. And I think that matters. So you can have the representation that you need. And I'm the only person in the race, and I'm the most qualified. Geopolitically, I'm ready to serve day one on the Armed Forces Committee. I've lived in agriculture, third generation, cattle rancher and campesino aquí in Colorado. I live in the country. I work the land. I farm. I ranch. I feed cattle. Tenemos una ganadería. We got a lot of cattle out here, and I love the country. I love Colorado, and I want to save and fight to save our republic. So that's why I'm here, and that's why I'm asking everybody to go to Holtorf, Fort Colorado, and vote for me on June 25th, Hugo. Richard Holtorf. Second line on the ballot.
All right, great. We appreciate your time. We look forward to the upcoming primary election on the 25th, and wish you the best on the trail. So this has been Richard Alonso Holtorf from what's your county?
Akron, Colorado.
Akron,
Washington
Colorado.
County.
That's on the Eastern Plain, and we recognize all the candidates, but we want to wish everyone a good election, and hopefully the best person will come out on top. We thank you again for your time. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. All right. Run up a little bit on the clock, but that was Richard Holtorf, Richard Alonso Holtorf, the only Hispanic candidate other than Greg Lopez in CD4. And it looks like Greg will take care of the special election, and we'll see what happens with the other, with the regular primary, and see who comes out on top on June 25th. So that's pretty much what we have tonight. We've got some interesting guests coming up in the coming weeks, so stay tuned. We've got 4th of July coming up. We've got the RNC convention coming up, which is going to be a lot of fun, especially after the July 11th sentencing of President Trump. Is the judge going to tell him, do not pass go, do not collect 200, go straight to jail, or what? You know, who knows what this clown judge is going to do. So I guess we'll wait and see, and we'll pray for him in the meantime. Thank you all for tuning in tonight. You got any final words, Nick?
No, just thank you for Richard Holtorf. Absolutely. Thank you for his military service, especially. You know, we're still in Military Month. It's Memorial Day, honoring current and long-serving veterans. So we really appreciate that. And yeah, I want to remind everyone, go and vote in this primary, because that is your first step in creating the agency that you need in your political life. Is at that first primary. Always take pride in the fact that you are a citizen of this country with that right. And hopefully some people like Holtorf can be able to strengthen it with voter ID laws and allow everyone to fairly trust in their elections again. So we thank him again, and we thank all of our viewers as always. We appreciate you listening. Hope to be listening for many years.
Gotta have that
to you.
Gotta have that voter ID, and that's something we really need to press on.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you all. Have a good evening.
God bless America. Take care, everyone.